My name is Sloane, I'm 24, and the moment my parents threw me out while my brother Caspian smirked in the doorway, changed our family forever. What started as a typical Sunday dinner argument about my disappointing life choices escalated into my father screaming those words that still echo in my mind. As I stood there with my hastily packed suitcase watching my golden child brother laugh at my expense, I had no idea that this betrayal would ultimately expose a web of lies that would bring our entire family empire crashing down. The blood loyalty I'd believed in my whole life was about to prove itself a complete illusion, and the consequences of that night would reshape not just my destiny, but destroy the very foundation my family had built their wealth and reputation on. Hey everyone, before we dive into this wild family drama that literally destroyed everything I thought I knew about loyalty and love, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a story about family, betrayal, sweet, revenge, and justice finally being served, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this one's going to take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't forget. Growing up in the Morrison household meant living in Caspian's shadow every single day. While I struggled through community college working 2 part-time jobs, my older brother sailed through his MBA at Stanford, fully funded by our parents' construction empire. Dad owned Morrison and Associates, the most successful commercial construction company in our state, employing over 200 people and generating millions annually. Mom managed the financial side, her sharp mind keeping track of every contract, every bid, every profit margin that built our family's fortune. Caspian was everything they wanted in an heir: charismatic, ambitious, and utterly ruthless when it came to business. At 28, he already held the title of Vice President of Operations, driving a brand new Tesla, living in a downtown penthouse apartment that Mom and Dad purchased outright. Meanwhile, I worked at a local coffee shop and cleaned offices at night, barely scraping together enough for my psychology degree at the community college. The favoritism wasn't subtle. Family dinners became showcases for Caspian's latest achievements, while my accomplishments were dismissed with polite nods. When he landed a major contract with the city for a new civic center, Dad threw him a celebration party. When I made Dean's List 3 semesters in a row while working 40 hours a week, Mom mentioned it briefly to her book club friends. The message was clear: Caspian was the future, and I was just along for the ride. What hurt most wasn't the money or the opportunities, it was the emotional distance. Dad would spend hours discussing business strategies with Caspian while barely acknowledging my presence. Mom would shop for his apartment, picking out expensive furniture and artwork while suggesting I should learn to live within my means when I mentioned needing a new laptop for school. They genuinely seemed to believe that loving someone meant preparing them for success, and in their minds I simply wasn't worthy of that investment. Caspian reveled in his position. He'd make comments about some people being natural-born leaders while others are meant to follow during family gatherings. He'd casually mention his salary, his bonuses, his stock options, always making sure I was within earshot. When relatives asked about my plans, he'd jump in with comments about how not everyone is cut out for the business world and how someone needs to work the service jobs. The breaking point came on that Sunday evening in March. I'd been struggling financially, behind on my rent, my car needing repairs I couldn't afford. I'd finally worked up the courage to ask if I could borrow $800 to cover my shortfall, promising to pay it back within 2 months. It wasn't an unreasonable request. They'd just bought Caspian a $15,000 home theater system for his birthday the month before. Dad's reaction was explosive. He launched into a tirade about personal responsibility, about how I needed to figure out life instead of relying on handouts. Mom stood beside him, nodding in agreement, her arms crossed in disappointment. But the worst part was Caspian leaning against the kitchen door frame with that smug smile, occasionally adding fuel to the fire with comments about teaching tough love and enabling failure. "You're 24 years old, Sloane," Dad shouted, his face red with anger. When I was your age, I was building this company from nothing. You're still asking for money like a child, but you gave Caspian his car, his apartment, his job. I pleaded, my voice breaking, because he earned it, Mom snapped. He showed initiative, drive, ambition. What have you shown us besides failure? That's when Caspian laughed, a cold, superior sound that cut through me like glass. Maybe it's time for some real tough love, little sister. Maybe she needs to learn what the real world looks like, and that's when Dad delivered the final blow. Get out and fend for yourself. The first few weeks after being thrown out were brutal. I crashed on my friend Maya's couch, working extra shifts at both jobs while trying to keep up with my classes. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Mom checking if I was okay. No texts from Dad suggesting we talk. Certainly nothing from Caspian except a single message that read, "Hope you're learning some life lessons." Maya, bless her heart, tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain my presence put on her tiny studio apartment. I was determined not to be a burden any longer than absolutely necessary. I found a room in a shared house with 3 other people. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I was covering all my expenses through sheer determination and caffeine. But something unexpected happened during those difficult weeks. Without the constant stress of family dinners and Caspian's superiority complex, my mind became clearer. I started noticing things I'd previously ignored, patterns that had been right in front of me for years. It started with small observations during my office cleaning job. I worked for a commercial cleaning company that serviced several businesses downtown, including some financial firms and law offices. One evening, while emptying trash at Hartwell & Associates, a prominent accounting firm, I noticed something odd in their garbage. Documents with my father's company letterhead, but with numbers that didn't make sense. The Morrison & Associates I knew from family conversations reported annual revenues of around $3.2 million. But these documents showed a different picture entirely. Contracts worth nearly $12 million annually, with profit margins that would make my family incredibly wealthy, far beyond what our lifestyle suggested. Curiosity getting the better of me, I started paying closer attention during my cleaning rounds. Over the next few weeks, I collected discarded documents from various offices, always making sure to take only what was already in the trash. What I discovered made my blood run cold. My father's company wasn't just successful, it was massively profitable, generating almost 4 times what my family had ever discussed. More disturbing, there were documents suggesting multiple offshore accounts, tax haven investments, and financial structures that seemed designed to hide the true extent of their wealth. The picture that emerged was of a family that had been lying to me about everything, not just their love and support, but the very foundation of their wealth. They hadn't been struggling to help me financially. They'd been hoarding millions while watching me work myself to exhaustion for pennies. But the real bombshell came when I found documents from a private investigator's office. Apparently, my parents had been paying someone to conduct background checks on potential romantic partners for both Caspian and me. The reports went back years, showing they'd been interfering in our personal lives in ways I'd never imagined. For Caspian, the investigations were clearly designed to ensure his partners came from appropriate backgrounds, wealthy families, good connections, people who could enhance the Morrison name. But for me, the investigations seemed designed to sabotage. The PI had been instructed to find problematic information about anyone I dated seriously, and sure enough, every relationship I'd tried to build had somehow fallen apart after my parents had concerns about the person. The most shocking revelation was a recent report about David, a guy I'd been seeing for about 6 months before the family exile. I'd really fallen for him. He was kind, intelligent, studying to be a teacher, and genuinely cared about me. But suddenly he'd become distant and eventually broke up with me, saying he didn't think we were compatible long term. According to the PI report, my parents had arranged for someone to approach David with fabricated stories about my mental health, suggesting I had a history of instability and financial irresponsibility. They'd literally paid to destroy my relationship with someone who might have loved me, all while pretending to be concerned about my poor choice in men. The betrayal was complete. Not only had they thrown me out over $800 while sitting on millions, but they'd been systematically sabotaging my happiness for years. And through it all, Caspian had been their willing accomplice, probably knowing exactly what they were doing. As I sat in my tiny shared room surrounded by evidence of my family's deception, I realized that my exile hadn't been punishment, it had been liberation. For the first time in my life, I could see them clearly. And what I saw was about to change everything. Armed with this new knowledge, I became obsessed with uncovering the full extent of my family's lies. Every night after my shifts, I'd spread the documents across my small room like a detective working a case. Maya would find me at 2 a.m. with papers everywhere, my laptop open to public records databases, trying to piece together the Morrison family financial empire. What I discovered was a masterpiece of deception that went far beyond hiding money from me. My father hadn't built his construction company from nothing, as family legend claimed. The seed money had come from my late grandfather's estate. Not the modest inheritance Dad always described, but a substantial fortune worth over $2 million in 1,990 seconds money. Even more damning, I found evidence that Morrison and Associates had been systematically underbidding government contracts, then inflating costs through a network of shell companies that all traced back to offshore accounts controlled by my parents. They weren't just wealthy. They were potentially committing massive fraud against taxpayers. The deeper I dug, the more elaborate the scheme became. Dad would bid low to win contracts, then his subcontractors, companies that existed only on paper, would charge premium rates for services that were either never performed or done by Morrison's regular crew at standard rates. The difference went straight into those hidden accounts. Caspian wasn't just the golden child. He was actively participating in the fraud. His MBA thesis, which I managed to find online, was essentially a blueprint for the exact money laundering scheme they were operating. He'd literally written an academic paper on how to steal from government contracts, then implemented it in the family business. But the most heartbreaking discovery was about Mom. I'd always seen her as Dad's partner, maybe even a victim of his domineering personality. The truth was devastating. She was the mastermind. Every shell company, every offshore account, every fraudulent invoice bore her digital signature. She'd been running the financial side of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise while lecturing me about fiscal responsibility. The private investigator reports revealed even more disturbing patterns. They hadn't just interfered with my romantic relationships, they'd been sabotaging my career prospects for years. Anytime I'd applied for better jobs, mysterious negative references would appear. Former supervisors would receive anonymous calls warning them about my reliability issues. They'd been actively keeping me poor and dependent while stealing millions from taxpayers. I needed help, but I couldn't go to the police yet. I needed ironclad evidence, and I needed to understand the full scope of their crimes. That's when I remembered Professor Chen from my business law class. She'd been an FBI financial crimes investigator before becoming a teacher, and she'd always encouraged students to reach out if they needed guidance. Professor Chen listened to my story with increasing alarm. When I showed her the documents I'd collected, her expression grew grave. "Sloane," she said carefully, "what you're describing isn't just tax evasion or hiding assets. This is RICO territory. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the government. We're talking about federal crimes with serious prison time." She helped me understand that I needed to be extremely careful. If my family discovered what I knew, they might take drastic action to protect themselves. She also explained that as a whistleblower, I could potentially recover significant damages under federal law, but only if I could provide evidence that would stand up in court. Working with Professor Chen, I developed a systematic plan to gather irrefutable proof. She introduced me to a former colleague at the FBI, who specialized in white-collar crime. Agent Rodriguez agreed to meet with me unofficially, and when she saw my evidence, she immediately understood the implications. "Your family has been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The government contracts alone represent millions in stolen taxpayer money. But this is bigger than financial crimes. They've been systematically isolating and manipulating you, which suggests a pattern of psychological abuse designed to prevent exactly what you're doing now." She helped me understand that my exile, rather than being the end of my story, was actually the beginning of justice. My family had made a critical error. They'd pushed me out while believing I was too weak and too ignorant to threaten them. They had no idea that their discarded, dismissed daughter was about to bring their entire criminal empire crashing down. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd always told me I wasn't smart enough for business, wasn't tough enough for their world. But here I was uncovering a federal conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight. All those years of being treated as inferior had actually given me the perfect vantage point to see their crimes clearly. Agent Rodriguez warned me that once we moved forward, there would be no going back. My family would know exactly who had exposed them, and the consequences would be severe. But she also promised that the law would protect me and that justice would finally be served. As I sat in that FBI office surrounded by copies of evidence that would destroy the Morrison family empire, I thought about Caspian's laugh, about Dad's cruel words, about Mom's cold dismissal. They'd thrown me away like garbage, never imagining that their trash would become their downfall. The investigation was about to begin in earnest, and I was ready to see it through to the end. But before we dive deeper into how I systematically destroyed my family's criminal empire, I need to pause here, because what comes next is going to shock you even more than what you've already heard. If you're feeling that mix of anger and satisfaction that comes from watching karma build up momentum, hit that notification bell, because the revenge that's coming will restore your faith in justice. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this story ends. Over the next 3 months, my life became a carefully orchestrated double act. By day, I maintained my routine: work, school, the appearance of a struggling young woman trying to rebuild after family rejection. By night, I worked with Agent Rodriguez and her team, systematically building an airtight case against Morrison and associates. The FBI's resources were staggering compared to my amateur detective work. Within weeks, they'd traced the shell company network across 7 states and 3 countries. They'd identified over $8.7 million in fraudulent government contract billings spanning nearly a decade. More importantly, they'd connected every transaction directly to my parents and brother through digital forensics that left no room for denial. Agent Rodriguez introduced me to the concept of a controlled operation. Instead of arresting my family immediately, we would gather evidence of ongoing crimes to strengthen the case. This meant I had to do something terrifying: reconnect with my family and pretend nothing had changed. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would reach out to Mom, apologize for my immaturity, and ask for reconciliation. Based on their psychological profile, people who needed to maintain control and superiority, the FBI predicted they would welcome me back conditionally, probably with lectures about gratitude and lessons learned. Making that phone call was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Hearing Mom's voice, fake warm and condescending, while knowing exactly what kind of criminal she was, required every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "Sloane, honey," she said, her tone dripping with manufactured concern, "we've been so worried about you. Have you learned to appreciate what family really means?" I swallowed my rage and delivered the performance of my lifetime. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was being selfish and ungrateful. I realize now how much you and Dad have done for me, and how much I took Caspian's success for granted instead of learning from it." The reconciliation dinner was surreal. There I was, back at the familiar table where I'd been humiliated and rejected, wearing a wire, and listening to my family congratulate themselves on their tough love approach. Dad lectured me about character building while cutting into a $200 steak. Caspian graciously accepted my apology for being jealous of his achievements. But the real breakthrough came when they decided to teach me about the family business. In their minds, my exile and return had proven I was finally ready to grow up and understand how the Morrison empire really worked. They wanted to mold me into a compliant family member who would be grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. Caspian, in particular, seemed excited to show off his business acumen. During a private conversation that I recorded on my phone, he walked me through their competitive bidding strategies with obvious pride. He explained how they analyzed government contracts to identify inefficiencies they could exploit, how they maintained relationships with key officials, how they structured their subsidiary companies to maximize flexibility. He was essentially confessing to multiple federal crimes while believing he was impressing his little sister with his sophistication. Dad was even more direct. During a family dinner where they'd had several drinks, he started telling stories about the early days of building the company. He described meetings with city officials, envelopes of cash changing hands, contracts awarded based on personal relationships rather than merit. In his alcohol-loosened state, he painted a detailed picture of municipal corruption going back over 15 years. Mom's contribution was the most damaging of all. She showed me the family books, a detailed ledger system that tracked every fraudulent transaction, every bribed official, every dollar skimmed from taxpayer contracts. She presented it as a lesson in proper financial management, completely unaware that she was handing over evidence that would send her to federal prison. The psychological toll of this double life was enormous. I had to sit through family dinners listening to them discuss their crimes while pretending to be grateful for their acceptance. I had to nod appreciatively while Caspian explained how he'd optimized their tax avoidance strategies. I had to smile when Dad talked about teaching those government bureaucrats the value of private sector efficiency. But what kept me going was the knowledge that every conversation, every document they showed me, every casual admission of guilt was being recorded and would eventually bring them to justice. They thought they were bringing me into their circle of trust. In reality, they were digging their own graves. The FBI team was amazed by the quality of evidence I was gathering. Agent Rodriguez told me that most financial crime cases required years of forensic accounting to prove intent and establish patterns. My family was providing full confessions, detailed records, and real-time documentation of ongoing crimes. After 3 months of this operation, we had everything needed for a prosecution that would put all 3 of them in federal prison for decades. The evidence was overwhelming, the crimes were severe, and their own words would convict them. Agent Rodriguez scheduled the final meeting to review our case before the arrests. As I sat in that FBI conference room looking at stacks of evidence that represented my family's complete destruction, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. They would finally face consequences for their crimes and their cruelty. But there was also sadness for the family relationships that had never really existed in the first place. The little girl in me still loved them, still wished things could have been different. But the woman I'd become understood that some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness and some crimes too serious for family loyalty to excuse. Justice was coming, and it would be swift and merciless. The final phase of the operation required perfect timing and flawless execution. The FBI had coordinated with multiple agencies, the IRS, the Department of Justice, and local authorities, to ensure that when they moved against Morrison and Associates, every asset would be frozen, every escape route blocked, every piece of evidence secured simultaneously. Agent Rodriguez explained that my family would be arrested during a coordinated sweep designed to prevent them from destroying evidence or fleeing the country. Financial crime suspects often had sophisticated contingency plans, and the Morrison family's offshore accounts suggested they'd given considerable thought to disappearing if their schemes were exposed. My role in the final phase was perhaps the most psychologically challenging yet. I needed to maintain normal family contact right up until the arrests, ensuring they had no warning that their world was about to collapse. This meant attending Caspian's birthday party, participating in family dinners, and even helping Mom plan an anniversary celebration for her and Dad. The birthday party was particularly surreal. Held at an expensive downtown restaurant, it was attended by city officials, business partners, and family friends, many of whom I now realized were probably aware of or complicit in my family's crimes. I watched Caspian accept congratulations on his business success, knowing that within days he'd be facing federal charges that would destroy everything he'd built his identity around. During his speech that night, Caspian thanked our parents for teaching him the value of hard work and integrity. He praised Dad for building something meaningful from nothing, and Mom for her unwavering support and brilliant financial mind. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. But the most telling moment came when he raised his glass to toast the Morrison family values that will guide us for generations to come. Looking directly at me, he added, "And to my sister Sloane, who's finally learning what it means to be part of something bigger than herself." That night I went home to my shared house and called Agent Rodriguez. "I can't do this much longer," I told her. "It's destroying me to pretend I love people who've spent years systematically destroying my life." "I understand," she replied. "But you need to know, the evidence you've gathered has implications far beyond your family. We've identified corruption in city government, state contracting, and federal agencies. Your strength in seeing this through is going to expose a network of criminals who've been stealing from taxpayers for over a decade." She was right. The investigation had revealed that Morrison and Associates was just one tentacle of a much larger corruption scheme. City Planning Director James Walsh had been taking bribes for favorable zoning decisions. State Transportation Deputy Commissioner Maria Santos had been steering highway contracts to preferred companies. Even federal GSA official Robert Chen had been manipulating bidding processes for government building contracts. My family hadn't just been criminals. They'd been central players in a systematic looting of public resources that had cost taxpayers millions and undermined the basic integrity of democratic institutions. The final family dinner before the arrests was held on a Sunday evening, exactly 8 months after they'd thrown me out of the house. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I sat at the same table, where I'd been humiliated and rejected, now armed with the knowledge that would end their freedom forever. Dad was in an expansive mood talking about a new contract they'd just won for a federal courthouse renovation. He described the project details with obvious pride, completely unaware that every word was being recorded and would be used as evidence of his intent to defraud the government once again. Mom showed me the latest financial reports pointing out how their strategic positioning had resulted in record profits. She talked about their long-term investment strategies, their retirement planning, their hopes for grandchildren who would inherit the Morrison legacy. It was heartbreaking to realize she genuinely believed she was building something lasting and meaningful. Caspian was his usual superior self, lecturing me about thinking bigger and understanding the complexity of modern business. He outlined his 5-year plan for expanding the company, his vision for Morrison and Associates becoming a regional powerhouse. His ambition was genuine, his pride was real, and his complete blindness to the criminal nature of his success was almost tragic. As the evening wound down, Dad made an announcement that nearly broke my composure. "Sloane," he said, his voice unusually warm, "your mother and I have been talking. We think it's time to make your position in the family business official. We want to offer you a job as assistant to the financial director, working directly under your mother to learn the real operations of Morrison and Associates." The job came with a $65,000 salary, full benefits, and a company car. It was everything I dreamed of during those years of working multiple jobs and struggling through community college. It was the acceptance and recognition I'd craved my entire life. And it was being offered just days before their arrest would make it all meaningless. I managed to thank them gracefully, accepting the position and expressing gratitude for their faith in me. But inside, I was screaming at the cosmic joke of it all. They were finally ready to treat me as family just as I was about to destroy them completely. That night, Agent Rodriguez called with the final timeline. Thursday morning, 6 a.m. simultaneous raids. Your family will be arrested at their homes, the business will be seized, and all assets will be frozen. Are you prepared for this? I thought about everything they'd put me through. The years of favoritism, the financial manipulation, the sabotaged relationships, the cruel exile, and the systematic criminal behavior. I thought about the taxpayers who'd been robbed, the government officials who'd been corrupted, and the public trust that had been betrayed. I'm ready, I told her. Let's end this. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. I sat in my car across from the Morrison family home watching as FBI agents surrounded the property at exactly 6 a.m. Agent Rodriguez had allowed me to witness the arrests from a distance, understanding that I needed to see this moment of justice with my own eyes. The coordinated operation was breathtaking in its precision. As Dad answered his front door in his bathrobe, agents were simultaneously arriving at Mom's office, Caspian's penthouse, and the Morrison and Associates headquarters. Within minutes, the entire criminal enterprise that had defined my family for over a decade was being dismantled piece by piece. I watched my father's face change from confusion to shock to desperate rage as Agent Rodriguez read him his rights. Through my telephoto lens, I could see him shouting, probably demanding to call his lawyer, likely threatening lawsuits and political connections. None of it mattered anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was airtight, and his days of intimidating his way out of consequences were over forever. The media coverage began within hours. By noon, every local news station was reporting on the Morrison construction scandal, a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme that had robbed taxpayers and corrupted government contracting for over a decade. The headlines were everything I could have hoped for. Local construction dynasty, built on crime, family business revealed as criminal enterprise, millions stolen from taxpayers in elaborate fraud scheme. But the sweetest moment came that evening when the full scope of the charges was announced. Dad faced 127 counts of fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and racketeering. Mom was charged with 89 counts, including conspiracy, money laundering, and running a continuing criminal enterprise. Caspian, my golden child brother who'd laughed at my exile, faced 156 counts that would likely result in decades in federal prison. The irony was perfect. They'd spent years telling me I wasn't smart enough for business, wasn't tough enough for their world, wasn't worthy of their investment or respect. Yet I'd been the one to uncover their crimes, build the case against them, and bring their entire empire crashing down. The financial devastation was immediate and complete. Morrison and Associates was seized by the government, its assets frozen, its contracts canceled. The family home went into federal receivership. Caspian's penthouse was liquidated to pay restitution. Mom's beloved art collection was auctioned off to compensate defrauded taxpayers. Everything they'd built, everything they'd valued, everything they'd used to prove their superiority over me, gone in a single day. The psychological impact was even more satisfying. Local media interviewed former employees who spoke about the Morrison family's arrogance and entitlement. Business partners described Dad's bullying tactics and Caspian's condescending attitude. Even relatives came forward to discuss the family's treatment of me, how they'd always sensed something wasn't right about the obvious favoritism and cruel dismissal. Agent Rodriguez kept me updated on their jail experiences. Dad, accustomed to commanding respect and deference, was struggling with the reality of being just another federal prisoner awaiting trial. He'd apparently tried to bribe guards, demand special treatment, and threaten other inmates, behavior that only resulted in disciplinary action and isolation. Mom, always so concerned with appearances and social status, was devastated by the public exposure of her crimes. Her book club friends avoided her, calls her charitable organizations, removed her from leadership positions, and her carefully cultivated reputation as a respectable businesswoman was destroyed forever. But Caspian's downfall was the most poetic. The golden child who'd built his entire identity around being superior to me was now facing the longest sentence of all three. His MBA, which he'd used to design their criminal scheme, was cited specifically in the charges as evidence of premeditation and sophistication. The very intelligence he'd lorded over me had become the proof of his guilt. The trial lasted 6 months and was covered extensively by local and national media. I testified as the star witness, describing years of psychological manipulation, financial sabotage, and systematic criminal behavior. The defense tried to portray me as a disgruntled family member seeking revenge, but the evidence spoke for itself. When the verdicts came down, I was sitting in the gallery watching my family face the consequences of their choices. Dad, 25 years in federal prison. Mom, 18 years. Caspian, 28 years. His longer sentence, reflecting his role in designing and implementing the most sophisticated aspects of their scheme. As they were led away in shackles, Dad caught my eye one last time. The rage and hatred in his expression was exactly what I'd expected. But there was something else there too, a grudging respect for what I'd accomplished, a recognition that he'd completely underestimated the daughter he'd dismissed as worthless. The financial restitution exceeded $12 million, money that was returned to taxpayers and government agencies. I received a whistleblower reward of $2.3 million under federal law, more money than I'd ever dreamed of having earned by doing what they'd always told me I was too weak and stupid to do. Today, 5 years later, I own my own forensic accounting firm specializing in government contract fraud. Professor Chen is my business partner, and we work exclusively on cases involving public corruption and financial crimes. The irony isn't lost on me that I've become exactly the kind of person my family claimed I could never be: successful, respected, financially independent. I've used part of my whistleblower reward to establish a scholarship fund for students from families who don't support their education. Every year I help dozens of young people escape the psychological traps of toxic family dynamics and build lives of integrity and purpose. My parents and Caspian are all still in federal prison with no possibility of parole for decades. Dad will be 78 when he's eligible for release. Mom will be 71. Caspian, my golden child brother, who laughed at my exile, will be 56, assuming he lives that long and maintains good behavior. Sometimes I wonder if they think about that Sunday dinner when they threw me out over $800. Do they remember Dad screaming, "Get out and fend for yourself"? Do they recall Caspian's cruel laughter? Do they understand that their moment of ultimate cruelty was actually the catalyst for their complete destruction? I hope they lie awake at night in their prison cells, understanding that the daughter they threw away like garbage became the architect of their downfall. I hope they finally comprehend that blood loyalty is meaningless when that blood is poisoned by greed, corruption, and cruelty. The Morrison family legacy isn't the construction empire they thought they were building. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate someone simply because you have the power to hurt them. They forgot that power dynamics can shift, that victims can become victors, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, is rarely denied forever. So let me ask you something. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that completely changed how you see blood loyalty? Have you witnessed karma catch up to people who thought they were untouchable? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because family revenge stories like mine prove that sometimes the best justice comes from the people who know you best and hurt you most. If this story of family vengeance and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Share this video with anyone who's ever felt underestimated by their family. Sometimes the people who dismiss us are the ones who should fear us most. Thank you for joining me on this journey of pain, betrayal, and ultimate triumph. Remember, when family throws you away, sometimes the best revenge is proving them completely wrong about who you really are. Until next time, keep fighting for the justice you deserve.